The 90s to 2000s had a lot of games based around World War, most predominantly around the Second World War. We had loads of huge titles and hits within this category back in the day, whereas now you don't see it too often.
That's enough, comrades. Come over here and pick up a grenade.
These are potatoes, Comrade Commissar. Why are we using potatoes instead of real grenades?
Because real grenades are valuable. In fact, they are worth a lot more than you are.
Oh, of course, Comrade Commissar, my mistake.
We had so many Call of Duty titles based around this. We had the first one, the United Offensive, DLC, Call of Duty 2, 3, and World at War. And we had loads of Medal of Honor titles as well. I think Wolfenstein is the only one that's really stuck about. Even though they don't get as much releases as they used to, it is still about. We had Brothers in Arms as well, that's another one. Sniper Elite is still going. They're pretty much sticking with the World War theme. But you can just see how loads of these titles have been eradicated or just completely switched themes. I think my favourites from that era were World at War, Call of Duty 2, and Medal of Honor Airborne. Those titles were so good. I do sometimes get the craving to go and play the World War II campaign game. However, we don't have a lot of new choices as of recent. I think the only one that really sticks out for me is Battlefield 1's campaign, which was World War I. I think this title does a really good job at showing us the level of quality that we could have had if the developers just stuck around the genre for a little bit longer.
Here it comes, boys. Nice serving with your lads.
Now, apart from Wolfenstein Sniper Elite, we still do see some games with this theme, but they're mainly multiplayer. And in this video, I do really want to focus specifically on the campaign style games, as that is really what we are missing these days. I'd like to explore why we don't see as much of these anymore. Why did this happen? Is it purely because of the oversaturation that we saw back in the day? I think first we have to ask, why did the golden era of World War II games come about in the first place? I think one of the biggest factors for why the Golden Age came about was the popularization of big war movies from back then, such as Saving Private Ryan, and also at the same time we had a huge rise in FPS and RTS titles, so a blend of the two was exactly what people were looking for. These games were perfect because the narrative was always clear, you were able to show off iconic battles from back in the day, and it's very easy to license things from back then. So as a result came about series such as the Medal of Honor series, Call of Duty, Company of Heroes. We also had Battlefield 1942 as well. And continuing to the 2000s, there was a massive flood of major releases around this genre. It still felt innovative and it still sold millions of copies. It definitely feels like the peak of this era was from 2000 to 2008, I reckon. And I reckon 2009 is when we actually started seeing a decline. People were showing more disinterest towards the genre. That's when we could really feel the oversaturation of this whole topic. We had far too many titles around the genre and it just didn't feel innovative and new anymore. Battlefield 1 and COD World War II were probably the only mainline titles that really stand out from the 2010s to 20s. However, I feel Battlefield 1 was the only real true attempt and it did a really good job in portraying that whole war, whereas COD World War II felt a bit too Hollywood and it just didn't have the same grittiness as those games did back in the 2000s. And then we had Battlefield 5 as well in 2018, but let's just not talk about that one. The final thing we've got that was major was Vanguard, but that game was such a joke that I think we should just skip over it, to be honest. We should not mention it on the list next to these classics.
What is that? What the is that?
Alright, pause out of the gate with whatever this is. God, I think this is a Garand. What have they done to you?
And I think a factor that affected as well is because Vanguard performed poorly, it might have shown other developers that people weren't interested in the whole theme anymore. However, I don't think it's a good outlook to have from Vanguard, as Vanguard just was a bad game. So why are there so few titles now? And is it possible that we'll ever see a new one come out? We talked about the fatigue and oversaturation of this series, however there are a few more factors involved in this. I think the first is cost. AAA titles now cost so much to develop that it's simply not feasible to develop a game just for a campaign that's 5 to 10 hours long. You sort of have to, alongside it, release a multiplayer experience, which is why games in the style of old Medal of Honor games just would not stand up these days. It would just be way too risky of an investment. As you can see these days, a lot of studios just likes to play it safe due to these rising costs. But this does work against them a lot of times as well, as lack of innovation and trying things again does completely kill companies.
Wonderful news, Norman. Wonderful. As a matter of fact, it's the reason we're selling the company.
What? But you can't do this to me. I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
We have also completely shifted towards fully focusing on live service multiplayer and the whole attention economy. AAA games are so expensive to produce now that by not playing into this, they're losing huge amounts of potential income. And of course, I don't like live service, the whole attention economy stuff, I think nobody does. However, that's just how it is. And I think these factors around the whole target audience and this whole money side just makes campaign World War titles completely unfeasible to produce. I don't think there's a case to be made around the whole subject of World War being less relevant, as you still see a lot of films coming around the topic which do very well. However, this is a different type of media that I don't think can be compared one to one. So while we do occasionally see some titles coming out around this, but very rarely, I don't think there's much hope of new titles like COD World at War, for example, Medal of Honor, based around world wars coming anytime soon. I think the genre is dead and it's just not worth developing these sorts of games anymore. So unfortunately, if you're likely looking to go back and enjoy a nice World War campaign, you have to boot up Battlefield 1 or World at War again. I'm afraid that will be the main choice going forward, but I'd love to be proven wrong, of course.